welcome back for part 5 of this 5-part seminar. This is how they see me. So in day 1, we discussed media culture, understanding semiotics, the study of signs and how we come to equivalate certain abstract concepts with certain carriers of these abstract concepts as signifiers, and they combine to create the sign or the symbol that we recognize when interacting and engaging with media representations and content. And of course, within understanding those signs and symbols, there are meanings associated with them at a cultural level, and we make sense of the signs and the symbols that we engage with media through our cultural experiences. We discussed Stuart Hall's model of encoding decoding, in which we recognize producers of content assemble all these carriers of meaning, these signifiers, into a text of some sort, film, video, music, and then transmit it to us as the audience, and on the audience, and we decode it, we interpret it, make sense of it from our own experiences and understandings, and we walk away with one of 3 readings. We oppose it, we accept it, or we negotiate the meaning. The second part of the series, we explored the idea of hegemony and ideology, these 2 concepts in relationship to media representations and symbols and signs that we engage. And with hegemony, we appreciate that there is a certain structure to society in which a group of elites have power and dominance over a subordinate group, and that power and that dominance is basically surrendered to the dominant group by the subordinate group. The elite dominant group is given authority over the subordinate group to establish morals, values, and beliefs, and the media is utilized as a tool, one of several social institutions that reinforce and introduce us to these values and beliefs that the dominant elite group would have us to adopt, as well as the concept of ideology and understanding that when we engage with media content, there is a point in which we begin to gather a sense of who we are and how we fit into the world, as well as make sense of others and the way they are situated in the world that we engage and we respond to. Day 3 of our seminar explored the idea of identity, especially gender-related identity, what it means to be masculine or feminine, and how representations and images that we engage with through film, television, and other forms of media establish a certain sense of masculinity. And the same thing for femininity. What do we expect of according to what we see and engage with in terms of media representations? And then our part 4 of the seminar explored the concepts of sexuality and sex portrayed. Mainstream sex has actually been pornified through certain performances and normalizations of behaviors, and with this pornification of mainstream sex, we've come into this terminology called sexualization, in which we objectify primarily women, because when we understand sexualization, it is about power, and we primarily objectify women and put them in a position in which they are subordinate and they are basically object and viewed through a male lens, through a male gaze. And then we also explored to some degree the concept of racial ethnic others being sexualized and how this is taking place based upon a hegemonic power structure that is heteronormative, white, male, and typically middle class. So in this particular discussion, what I'd like to discuss is the idea of socioeconomics and how it is represented in media and how we make sense of class based upon the images and the signifiers that we engage in media content. So when we think about social economic status and class, we understand social class is probably the most fundamental dimension of making sense of how society is structured and set up. And so if we look at it from a Marxist perspective, social class is determined by an individual's relationship to power and distribution. So the question becomes, do you have the ability, the capacity to produce some form of material or some item that is of value to society? And if you are able to do that, are you able to generate enough of that product, that thing, in which you can generate revenue and contribute to society in some way, shape, or form? So when we understand or appreciate this concept of social class, it is embedded in the understanding of power. And if you have the ability to produce and make something of value, then you move up the ladder, up the hierarchy. So when we take into context the idea of social class, Weber suggests there are three elements of social class that we should keep in mind. One being economic position. Again, this is the idea of, are you able to financially produce and make a product or some sort of service that is of value to the society? And are you able to generate capital? Are you able to generate profit and revenue based upon that product, that item, that service that you offer to society? And if you are, how much profit, how much revenue are you able to generate? Because that is going to more or less position you somewhere in the hierarchy of social class. Then there's also the element of social status or prestige. So social status gets into the idea of, with your name, your family background, who you are, do you demand a certain level of prestige amongst society and others that you engage with? And then lastly, the element of power. How powerful are you politically or economically? Does your social prestige, does your economic position also grant you a certain level of ability to influence people's decision making? So some scholars also include other elements of social being and existence to include into the leveling and hierarchy build of social class, including education. How far in the education process did you get and achieve? Occupation, what is it that you do? The income that you actually generate. What is your worth at the end of the day after you finish working a long, hard day? How much do you make at the end of the day, end of the year? And how much wealth have you accumulated? Not only what you're making right now, how much have you been able to set aside and save as well as invest? Moving forward, if we recognize classes according to what U.S. Tradition and scope and perspective, we usually function within about five forms of social class. Lower class is typically going to be equated with a household income that is less than $30,000 per year. Your working class, some may call or refer to that as lower middle income, and that would typically be anywhere from about $30,000 to $50,000. Then you get into middle class, and that's generally going to be about $50,000 to $100,000. And moving up to upper middle class, which then breaks you into the $100,000 yearly income to roughly about mid 300s, $350,000 or so. And of course, upper class, or what some would call rich, and that in household income would be $350,000 a year. So when we break class is basically the structuring and the establishment of where we are positioned in this hierarchical understanding of power and position and prestige in society. So when we take in this concept of social class and social economic status and put it in conjunction with media and how that may play out, being scholars such as Paulson and O'Gwen have researched and come to find that half of Americans, just about half of Americans, believe that they are middle class, yet the mass media seems to be misleading our perceptions and having us to believe that we are middle. Some of us don't fall into that category, but we don't know it because our sense of what social class is has been blurred by the perceptions that we pick up on through media representations. And a lot of this comes from the expectation of living the American dream. And you ask yourself, well, what is this American? Some would suggest that the American dream is based on three factors, one being opportunity. Every individual and family should have the ability to move above and beyond their current situation economically or socially. The idea of meritocracy, the work that you put in will be deemed, in essence, earn you the ability to move upward in terms of financial and social economic mobility. And last word, upward mobility, of course, because of opportunity, because of the work you put in, that meritocracy, you will have the capacity to move upward and beyond the current state of social economic status that you currently experience. So when we think about the idea of capital and social class, and especially picking up on it in media representations and these symbols that represent meaning, we often will pick up on what Bordeaux refers to as four elements of capital and social class, and those are economic capital, the representation of money and property and how that's demonstrated in media text and context, Cultural capital, cultural goods and services, including education. Social capital, how important is it for us to have acquaintances and networks that to some degree build in that level of social prestige that was alluded to in the earlier slide. And lastly, symbolic capital, the idea of legitimation. Oftentimes we may see a film or television show in which a person performs or behaves in a particular way that seems to legitimize their position and place within a certain level of social hierarchy. What I find interesting when consuming media content, especially when observing for social class or how media representations and text position concepts of social class, when observing like those that are considered low income, we as an audience are basically allowed to consume the horrors, the fears of what it is to live in poverty without actually engaging in the material realities. So we may see someone that is living in an impoverished, low income lifestyle, but we really don't have the connection of what it means or what it has been for that. So we are watching it from a safe distance and processing all of this information. And unfortunately, scholars suggest that when we watch at this safe distance and we consume these horrors as an audience and not actually engaging in this in some sort of supportive manner, we begin to view those that are low income or in they're part of the impoverished class as undeserving. They are not worth having financial well-being or worth having some sort of prosperous sustainability in life. They're pathological. They often tend to be criminal or liars, or some sort of negative trait is pathologically taking place in their life and in their existence. And they can't seem to shake that. And moreover, they are irresponsible. They don't take care of the things that they're supposed to when they are supposed to. They wake up late. They get to work late. Anything that befalls them is their own fault because they do not have the responsibility and the maturity to be able to handle life as we all are, should be able to. And so when we think about depictions of the working class in media, particularly in television, we understand that there are some traditional stereotypes that go along with this class and the socioeconomic status. And for the most part, when they are represented, they're often seen as lacking intelligence, lacking in terms, they definitely lack in parenting. And so it even breaks out in this way in regards to the gender relationship in regards to observing the working class. Men are often seen as lazy, unintelligent buffoons. And you see here some very popular television shows and series over the course of TV history that demonstrate the working class. And I can certainly attest to at least three of these programs: the Flintstones, The Middle, and The King of Queens. The male characters at some point in their experience had an opportunity to have a managerial position, take a lead position in their place of employment, and for whatever, and ended up going back to their daily job that was not management. But all of these individuals in these shows had the opportunity to be upward mobile in regards to managerial, or demonstrated the lack of ability to be upward mobile in that nature. And of course, the women in these roles, in these social class depictions, are often seen as the ones that have the control of the domestic sphere. And definitely seen in regards to the Honeymooners, the photo at the far bottom right, and the Flintstones, in a time in which it was much more accepted and expected for women to be the ones at home doing the cooking and the cleaning and nurturing of the children and things. But here, even when we move into the 20th and 21st century, where both the women in these shows, in the middle and in the, also seen and expected to be the ones to take care of the house as well. So when we look at the working class through a media lens, they are unable to take responsibility for their own lives. They seek counsel from other figures of in order to be able to get some sort of control of their. Now, of course, when it comes to the upper class, those that are economically set and established, they are often depicted in a more favorable light than those that are working class, and certainly more favorable than those that are lower class. And they tend to represent or demonstrate better parenting skills in media content. They often have or are associated with having better taste, and whether that's in terms of fashion, automobiles, homes, decoration, food, whatever it may be. They have a better palate in all these areas. And then lastly, they're often seen as being more intelligent, and that is often demonstrated through the concept of education as well as position in the workplace. So when it comes to being upper class, at least through media representation, they often demonstrate a better sense of life and having a more favorable sense of what it is to have a higher socioeconomic status. Now, of course, that's not to say that there are not necessarily negatives that may be associated with it being. So it's not to say that all the representations of upper class are completely favorable, but more often than not, they have a much better depiction of life and living life than those who are working class or lower. So here we come to the idea of class and performing class. Class, especially when we watch it on television or experience it in film, is a performance. It is a script that involves language use, that involves the use of mannerisms, and certainly dress. And so the examples below that you see on the slide, the Duck Dynasty, it is interesting if you read the article about the Duck Dynasty, how they bring attention to the fact that these gentlemen were at one time dressed in what is considered yuppie attire, wearing, suits. They were clean shaven for. And so what we see in terms of the Duck Dynasty is basically a performance of class, according to the scholars and the theorists that write about that particular episode, that particular program. Likewise, with the Real Housewives franchise, these women are utilizing mannerisms and dress and fashion and certain behaviors to lead us to believe that they belong within a particular social class. So whether it's the Real Housewives of New York City or but as we watch these programs and understand or recognize that they are depicting or reflecting a certain level of social economic status, they are actually reflecting or giving us a performance of what they think that class is supposed to look, sound, and behave like. And even though in our natural lives, in our day-to-day experiences, we even ourselves perform to some level an expectation of what class is, when we see it depicted on television or in film, these become these performatives made explicit. So they are directly saying to us, this is what class or this particular level of social economic class. What we are understanding is that through their televised performances, they are giving us some representation or some demonstration of a socioeconomic status and placement in class and hierarchy. So here we are, the last slide of the seminar, the last slide of this discussion, and I leave it with one word: authenticity. So coming off of this last slide in regards to performing class, we understand or appreciate that often what we see in terms of socioeconomic status on television, in film, or in videos or in books is a performance in ways. It is a representation, a reflection of what those individuals think that socioeconomic status looks like and behaves like, how they dress, how they talk. I challenge you to think about authenticity in terms of media content in all stages, in all facets. When we see someone who is of a different ethnic or racial background, are they performing an authentic version of that culture, or are they performing what they believe society expects of that race and of that ethnicity? Likewise, for men and women, are they performing an authentic version of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman? Are they giving us their understanding of masculinity as opposed to the expectations of what masculinity should look like? Are they performing femininity according to the hegemonic, heteronormative traditions that we've established, or is their behavior an authentic behavior? When we engage and interact with television, with film, with music, all forms of media, something that we should often be questioning and asking ourselves, as well as even having good discussion and conversation with others, is how authentic were these individuals, were this context and this content that I engaged with in terms of representing so. With that, I hope this has been a helpful and enlightening educational seminar for you. I thank you for taking the time to listen and observe and hear my observations. I welcome you to communicate with me. I can be contacted at rcraig, rcraig, at gmu.edu. And thank you again.